It's a multi-layered experience that metaphorically everybody goes through one way or another. Everybody has to dust themselves off and get back up, after some sort of a trauma.
Yeah.
And the mind doesn't really know the difference between, a physical trauma and something that's, just more in the mind, like a broken heart. How about that? It's not much different,
Yeah.
to be able to love again after you lost trust,
Yeah.
right? In some form or another. I think it's part of the human experience.
Yeah.
It's part of the hero's journey, right? Read Joseph Campbell's work
Yeah.
on the hero's journey. Fascinating. It's archetypal, and we see it in so many different hero myths, across cultures. And if something is cross-cultural, and if it appears in all these different traditions, well, then it says it's a human truth. And one of those truths is that we build ourselves up, we get our confidence, as we get older, we reach eventually a point where something causes a fall. We lose our confidence. We might have to, deal with physical healing as well as along with that. But either way, it's part of the program, to truly be, an archetypal hero, there has to be a fall from grace.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that resurrection of the human spirit to build back up. And of course, your life may be different, but it can still be inspired. It can still be free and unlimited in the ways that matter. And every time somebody gets back up in some form or other, they really are being a hero, and they're demonstrating to themselves who they really are, demonstrating resilience.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
That
that's the
that's
word.
that's our
That's the
nature.
word. Yeah. Yeah, actually, you brought up a word I think a lot about, and when I skydive is trust, because if I feel, most people are great, but sometimes I meet people and we talk on the ground, and I don't feel they're 100% genuine. I feel
Yep.
this. I feel that I don't want to go into the sky with them.
Yep.
And I think that trust we build is so important because I don't know what you think, we're two different generations, but I think more and more we're losing touch with those like primal instincts and all of that with the development of technology and our
Yep.
fast-paced lives and everything. And
Yeah.
it's kind of a gateway to like get it back into that.
Yeah. 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 I mean, trust is assigned by the individual,
Yeah.
right? And I think one of the ideas that humanity will benefit from is to go out of profiling people as a certain type of person based on their experiences and just calling it a mindset. There is the mindset of, sort of the angry person. It's a pattern. It doesn't mean that it's a person that it's an angry person, right? And somebody who's downtrodden and beaten and injured or whatever, traumatized in some way, it's not who they are. It's the path they've walked, the pattern of habits they've created within that mindset, and there's an inertia to it. There's like a boulder rolling down a hill. It's not so easy to stop it or change its direction, but it is available, especially when we take that step back and realize, no, this is just the pattern of my mind. It's the habit that I've fallen into, disbelieving, to lose the trust in others, lose the trust in ourselves, lose the trust in our parachute systems or the car or horses. I was just talking to somebody who is now afraid of horses. Not saying there isn't a reason to be afraid of horses. They're big and dangerous potentially. But when somebody walks up to a horse with a lot of fear, because of their mindset, they create a particular experience. They bring it out of the physical reality because of their projection that becomes, physical. And somebody who loves horses and knows how to work with them and knows how to communicate what I would call vibrationally, just you show up with love in your heart and the horse becomes trustworthy. And they sense it in a variety of ways. Bees can smell fear, right? Because we give off pheromones. It's not just, woo woo, um, you know, uh, new science, new age kind of idea that, the world feels your vibration. Well, okay, yes, I believe that's true, but not everybody's ready to, go all in on that kind of an idea. But certainly if you go, well, you have measurable pheromones that you give off when you're afraid. And at the very least, we can, sort of ground it in the science, and how that pheromone, for instance, of fear causes an effect in the observer, and the people around you. If somebody's really nervous in the airplane or before a base jump, the people around you are affected by it. Doesn't mean they have to let it in, but they feel it. So we have a responsibility,
Yeah.
to manage our emotions and stay in the game, stay in the positive frame of mind where we're visualizing the outcome we desire instead of looping the mind movie of the opposite of what's desired, the crash or the horse biting us or the loved one cheating on us or whatever things that human beings fear. You can certainly pave the way, to an increased probability of worst case scenario stuff playing out. We're capable. We're that powerful, which means we're likewise just as powerful to, fully embody our dreams, fully embody our belief that we can influence things in a positive manner and create a different outcome.
Well,
Yeah.
this is not what I was. This is great. It's not. I didn't think about this until now, but there's a wave of people like manifestation is becoming a kind of a trend.
Yep.
Maybe not the right word, but do you believe in that? I mean, it's kind of what you're talking
Yep.
about, right?
I've witnessed it.
It's not.
I've witnessed it again and again. The scared skydivers have more problems.
Yeah.
And you can put it into the woo-woo category of the law of attraction if you wish, but some people have an allergic reaction to that kind of idea. Like, oh, it's too freaky. All right, well, how about we go to quantum physics? How about we take a closer look at what we have evidence for when we see the behavior of subatomic particles, that when there's the presence of an observer, they perform in a specific way. It gets crystallized into a specific, state of matter. It's not superpositioned in infinite possibilities as it was as a wave function before there was an observer.
Right.
So the light can evidence this, but subatomic particles as well. The double slit experiment, as far as seeing how light performs when you run it through two slits in a board, it'll either create a wave pattern or just a singular, when there's the observer, you know, two lines of light on the wall. And it depends on whether there's an observer or not, whether there's an interference pattern caused by like a wave, like water would do. So that alone, it's a starting place, but I don't think it's necessary to be all in with, sort of the spiritual implications of modern quantum physics. I just think that people need to recognize there's consequences to your thoughts. There's consequences to your beliefs. And it's not just whether your parachute opens funny or not. It's greater than that because your cells of your body hear your thoughts. You're constantly, either expecting healing or expecting it to fall apart. As a 58-year-old skydiver, I've spent a lot of time resurrecting my body form so that I can continue jumping. And that's something that becomes, part of our lives increasingly as we get older. And you're like, well, I can be that version of an older person who just sits in chairs and watches TV, or I can be the kind that gets outside, and does stuff and challenges myself and stays in the game. Because the soul doesn't know the difference. The soul is the inner child. I think, our basic nature is exuberant and playful and creative. And so either we're being that or we're slowly dying.
Right.
Or
Yeah,
maybe not so
that's yeah.
maybe not so slowly. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, but that's another aspect to what we're talking about the how society is developing. Because I think one thing is how we're getting more and more disconnected from each other, but also our body and mind are getting more and more disconnected.
Yep.
And I don't know if you're familiar with. I read this book that really got me. It was called Born to Run by Christopher McDougall. And
Hmm.
it's a
Sounds
great
good.
book. Yeah, it's about this tribe in Mexico that lives like people were living 2,000 years ago, And basically, what they do is run. They can run 100 kilometers every day if they'd like. And he's claiming that that's what humans are supposed to do. That's our natural resources, long distance running, and moving.
Interesting.
And it makes sense moving across far distances. But we don't have to do that anymore. And what you're saying, like your emotional state and your physical state is so connected. If you're not well physically, it's hard to be well mentally, and the other way around. So,
Yeah, yeah. And there's a belief thing going on there too. Like what is possible? How far can you run? Well, it's based on your belief structure.
yeah,
It's belief, that the faith comes from your basic cosmology of what you believe you're capable of, what you believe is capable on a larger scale, like for a marathon runner. It's very easy for you to go, wow, they can run 26 miles, but me, I'm just a regular person. Well, I don't know. Is that really true? Let's change the framing. You have to run a marathon to save your child's life. They're like, I can run 56 miles, right? So when somebody's properly motivated, suddenly they invest their belief, and their faith makes it possible. How many push-ups can you do, right?
yeah,
People constantly go, well, I can do this many. Yeah, but if you had to do this to save your life, or something that really properly inspires you, and you summon your life force, and that's huge, right? I mean, I was in a wheelchair, right? At one point, I had a pretty bad paragliding accident. And it's where I realized more than anything that I, we have tremendous power to summon forth energy into our body when we fully, stop doubting, right? We stop limiting ourselves in our mindset and just in the present moment go, one more push up. I can do this. Yes, you can. You're a bottomless pit of energy if you summon it. But that's, I'm not convinced that everybody has those experiences, like a true, near death experience or something that causes you to need to summon that tremendous, sort of berserker energy. You know what I mean? Without the poison mushrooms. We're capable of doing that. And given that that is who we are, I think we've told ourselves a lot of lies over the years to make ourselves small,
yeah,
to justify and basically fund our laziness, to make an excuse to stay on the couch or to not push against the pain so that we can get stronger. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
It's very sad what can you do besides affecting yourself and other people around you? You're making a huge impact in what you've built, and I think it's great. But also, I think it's a society. Sorry, I'm messing up the word. The societal thing. The way it's structured. It's hard to like see that unless you're put in that situation, like you said, like you had a near fatal experience and you were forced to see that. But most people won't get in that position unless they're coincidentally put in it. In the world we
Well, the
live in.
shift, I believe the shift of paradigm can happen anyway. I don't think that we need a near-death experience necessarily. I think that we can imagine it. That's what our prefrontal cortex is for, right? Is to envision beyond the given data, to be able to see into a possible future and manufacture it in the moment. It's now on the way to you because you've pictured in your mind, right? So this is a creation center, not just a visualization center. And if we decide to shift our paradigm, right, and we decide to look at, for instance, societal norms, right? This is what people do. They're normal like this and whatever, and anything else is abnormal behavior. There's certainly things in the abnormal realm that are actually very human, very natural to us on a deep level. And we have to recognize that these societal norms are internalized voluntarily. All the stuff that we would go, oh, that's actually not so healthy, but it's normal for people to do. It's just a choice to continue to believe it, right? What is a belief but a thought that you just continue repeating to say to yourself in your mind? And then you make it real again. You refresh it in the present moment, and it becomes solid in that moment for you. But the shift in mindset, the shift in paradigm is always available.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you don't have to cross over and come back. It's the hard way.
Yeah.
A lot of people do, when it gets bad enough and the constructs of the self are so solid and so negative that they can't be changed, there has to be something that shakes it up. They have a heart attack and suddenly they change career because they realize that their career had no deep like value to them, right? Moralistic, there was no virtue in their career for them based on what they value on a deep, and they have a pivot.
Yeah. There's
There's a
a
great book. Yeah, there's a great book on that called The Second Mountain.
second mountain.
Where you climb the first mountain of fame, fortune, and money, and whatever, and then it loses its meaning for you, and then the second mountain is the path of service, right? It's helping others. It's not about money so much anymore.
Yeah.
It's about doing something of meaning with your day, something that helps.
There's a kind of fear, I think, involved in that too, though. Like, but maybe to a more positive extent, because the reason, like, going into careers such as what I'm doing in music, it's hard. I'm not guaranteed job security in any way, but the fear is to not do something meaningful. And do you think people, instead of like pushing the fear away, can use it for good and in a way?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And of course, the fear sometimes is valid,
Yeah.
right? I mean, but that fear can also be motivating to solve the fear's source. That's when it's useful, right? Metaphorically, you're riding to altitude and you're worried. So you check your gear one more time carefully and slowly, and now your fear gets softer because you did something about it, or you just nudge the person next to you. What direction are we landing on this one? Suddenly you feel better because you have more information to inform your actions and clarify your visualization of what is to come. And that's great. Fear has its place. But I find if we stay in the feeling of the fear for very long, we don't solve the problem.
Right.
We stall out. We become kind of stuck in the victim mentality, and that's obviously we have the freeze state, which is natural, uh, built into us, and that is not just overwhelmment and locking up, cognitive dissonance as we call it. It's beyond that. It's also hiding, like biologically, hiding from the bear, hiding from, whatever scares you. That locking up is of course, the motion could, now the predator hears you or something. So that's in us. That is an adaptive program within the mind, the cellular structure.
Yeah.
But we also have attack and retreat, right? That's the more feisty side of it. Either you're running really fast, and you can run a lot faster when you're scared. If you're being chased by an elk. I got chased by a moose once when I was healing. I was on crutches and I was crutch hiking in the forest up, kind of, it was in Vermont, up far north, very beautiful, very similar to Norway. And this moose was chasing me, and I couldn't believe it. I was a ninja with those crutches getting away from the moose.
Wow.
And of course, the anger and attack is also part and parcel for being a mammal who is threatened, that doesn't have an escape route or has a winning formula to first and foremost get angry, be forceful, raise the voice, be angry and scary and intense, because that's what has worked in the past. And so some people will naturally go to that one most of the time, and others will go towards the escape. And escape can be getting drunk too. It's still escaping. You're escaping the mindset. And I think that we have to recognize that those tendencies are natural. And it's also potentially natural, if we train ourselves, to step out of that thought system completely, dropping that whole automatic thing through beginning slower breathing, begin that fuller breathing, relaxing the body. And suddenly, as that occurs after, maybe the second or third breath where you're doing kind of yoga breathing and you're emptying your mind of identification with those thoughts, I'm worried about that topic. I'm going to get off the topic for just a moment, long enough to soothe myself, re-enliven prefrontal cortical activity so that I now can envision a different set of possibilities that create safety that I might not have, occurred to me when I was just, looking for something to pick up and hit it with, the monkey man, fight it back. What if there's another way? What if I can be more graceful? What if there's a smarter way through this to reduce my fear by reducing my actual risk?
Well, speaking of breathing, I think that's interesting because, as we grow up, we learn how to walk and we learn how to talk and to run and everything, but, we never really learn how to breathe.
It's true. Yep.
And it's kind of strange. I realized this 5 years ago. I think I was really stressed about something and I realized that I was breathing, but it was barely, and you're not conscious about something you do every minute of every day. And I think
it is.
I think it's
we're always
strange.
doing, and the question is, are we doing it efficiently?
Yeah, exactly.
Where we're truly oxygenating our brain and we're making the breath a ritual to be reborn into a new mindset through consciously breathing. Right? And consciously breathing can be switching into box breathing, for instance, where the inhale is long and slow and complete, right? The lungs get filled and you hold it for the amount of time it took to inhale. And then you slowly release for that same nice, long, slow exhale. And then you hold at the bottom for that same amount of time. And if you do that with full awareness, anybody can shift out of the mindset that they were in because their body has been de-escalated. That was William James, the father of modern psychology, asserted, I think correctly, that the state of the body is mirroring the state of the mind, right? However, the state of the mind mirrors the state of the body, that it goes kind of both ways. So the example he used is you're really worried, you're in the bad side of town, and you're walking down the street in the dark and you're all alone, and you start seeing things to be afraid of, right? Like you get suspicious, sus. And so as a result, you walk faster. As a result of walking faster, the heart now will go faster. The body will escalate because it's being used. You're using that negative energy or whatever you want to call it, that power energy. And as a result of that escalation of the physiological state, the brain now changes in its patterning. It changes into the mindset of attack, retreat, hide, and it loses compassion. It loses the ability to see through other people's eyes and other perspectives, to see alternative possibilities of what can go down. And it loses the ability to really think clearly and rationally, right? Rationing as in the balance of power of your perceived ability versus the perceived risk. There's multiple variables within both of those, but a bottom line is always our fear comes down to, do I know that I have the ability to handle that specific risk? And do I put it into, its proper place in terms of what are the real probabilities? And humans are terrible at that, because what we tend to do is see something that is a really scary possibility and increase its likelihood in our minds by fixation. And now we make ourselves more worried just because it's that terrifying. Maybe we have a trauma that this reminds us of that because it looks a little bit like that, has a similar flavor. And so the mind goes back into the nightmare of expectation, of expecting that worst case scenario thing from happening to happen. And we lose our knowledge of self. I think that that's what boosts our confidence and softens the fear more than anything, is to know who you are, to know that you've solved emergency situations before again and again. Proof is you not being dead. You know, it's not that easy to stay alive on this planet. There's a million different ways to die. And yet somehow you're here, which says that your awareness, your presence, and your ability to think your way through scenarios is commendable. And you got to, you know, to know that in the moment when you start to feel afraid, because you feel afraid because you forgot that, because you fixated on a worst case scenario visualization and got stuck on that, you know, looping mind movie.
I love that, and you know, you said there's a million ways to die, and on this planet, and you've come this far. You know, in this day and age, you know, one of the most common ways, unfortunately, to die is by suicide. And I think with this mindset, we could, like, it would be possible to reduce that in a sense. You know, but,
Yeah.
and
Yep.
yeah, it's the sad truth, of today's world, and you
It
know,
is.
I don't think it was like that. I don't have the statistics, but it wasn't like that 100, 200, 300 years ago, I think. So,
Yeah. Yeah. When people lose hope,
yeah,
they lose hope that they will be able to get out from under the pain. And they only see one option is to make the light go out, you know, control, alt, delete. And I understand how people get there. I completely understand it. But always that mindset is ignoring things in order to muster that much negativity, that much hopelessness, and you know, feeling of being caged, you know, in a reality that you feel like you can't change. You have to justify why you're in a cage. You have to believe it through making the story, you know, and elaborating on the story of why you can't, why you don't have the power, why you're weak, you know, why there's no other way to look at it. It is a hypnosis that we do to ourselves. Fear is self-hypnosis where you're deliberately ignoring all your upsides. You know, and you're forgetting all the times that you did lift yourself up out of a negative situation or a negative mindset. We have to deliberately convince ourselves of something that isn't true,
yeah,
which means that we're also capable of deliberately convincing ourselves of what is true, that you are a badass, you know, every one of you are. You're capable of pulling yourself up out of pain, out of suffering, out of all those dark spaces that we create in our minds and fix it in some way. And it always starts with fixing the mindset. You might not be able to change all the circumstances of your life, but you can change the way you feel about it, how you see it. You know, the 10,000 foot view, right? You on the ground, you see the garbage, the litter, the spray paint, the people being cranky at each other. But man, you go to 10 grand and you look down and go, it's also beautiful. It's all in where you are.
perspective.
Yep.
Wow.
Perspective.